All right, we are back here on the Hoplite channel. One more time, I am your host Hop, and you clicked on this video because you couldn't wait to see Norse literature, Prose Edda, part 3. This will be the final part of our Norse literature series dedicated to the Prose Edda. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in for all 3 parts. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed making it. This has been fun. Just reading the myths, learning about the Norse mythology, behind all of the things that make the Norse culture intriguing and fascinating stem from these myths, right? And so much of the Viking culture can be traced to these fantastic stories. And in this last part, we are going to read from 4 of them, as you can see here. These readings will be quite long. So buckle in for the ride. I'm going to try to get through them as expeditiously as I can. But here they are. So we'll read first about the story of Sleipnir, which would be Odin's famous 8-legged horse, because if you're going to have a fast horse, 4 legs is just not enough, right? You got to have 8. And on the cover of the Prose Edda, you actually see this myth in art form. It's Odin with his cup, and he's holding the reins, and you obviously see the 8 legs of Sleipnir. So we'll read that myth, and then we'll move to Thor meets Utgarda-Loki. Utgarda-Loki is a giant. And next we'll move to the Death of Baldr. And as I said, we learn a little bit more about how the trickster god Loki was always managing to get himself and everybody else into trouble, and the Death of Baldr was probably the worst of those fiascos. And then lastly, we get to the Ragnarok story and the rebirth of the world following Ragnarok. Right. Okay, so without further delay, let's fill the Viking horn and move on to Sleipnir. Yes, sir. Raise your horns. I'm wearing my Amon Amarth shirt. This is a Swedish metal band from... well, I guess you would say, actually, I'm not even sure what city they're from, but I know that they rock pretty hard. And if you listen to any of their songs, almost every single one they've written has something to do with the Scandinavian myths that you'll find in the Prose Edda and elsewhere. But anyway, cheers. Skål. Okay. We jump to page 50. This is under the heading, The Master Builder from Giantland and the Birth of Sleipnir. Then Gangleri asked, "Who owns the horse Sleipnir? What is there to tell about him?" Hai replied, "You know little about Sleipnir and are ignorant of the events that led to his birth. Still you will find it a tale well worth hearing. It happened right at the beginning, when the gods were settling. After they'd established Midgard and built Valhalla, a smith arrived. He offered to construct in 3 seasons a fortress so solid and trustworthy that it would be safe against mountain trolls and frost giants, even if they entered Midgard. As his payment, he asked for Freya in marriage, but he also wanted the sun and the moon. Then the Aesir, consulting among themselves, arrived at their decision. Their agreement with the builder was that he should have what he requested if he completed the fortress in 1 winter. But if any part of the fortress was unfinished on the first day of summer, he would lose his part of the bargain. No other man was to help him with his work. When stating these conditions, they agreed to let him have the use of his horse, called Svadilfari. Loki was the one who made this decision after the matter was placed before him. On the first day of winter, the builder began to erect the fortress, and during the night he used his horse to haul stones. The Aesir were amazed at the size of the boulders the horse could drag. The horse's feat of strength was twice that of the builders. But good witnesses and many oaths had sealed the bargain, because the giant did not think it safe to be without a truce among the Aesir if Thor should return. At that time, Thor was away in the east hammering on trolls. As the winter passed, the building of the fortification steadily advanced, until it became so high and so strong that it was unassailable. With only 3 days left before summer, the work had progressed right up to the stronghold's entrance. Then the gods sat on their thrones of fate and sought a solution. They asked one another who had been responsible for the decision to marry Frey into Giantland and destroy the sky and the heavens by taking the sun and moon and giving them to the giant. It became clear, as in most other things, that the one who had advised in this matter was Loki, son of Laufey, the one who counsels badly in most matters. They told him that he could expect a bad death if he failed to devise a plan for the builder to lose his wager. They attacked Loki, and when he became frightened, he swore oath that whatever it cost him, he would find a way to keep the builder from completing his part of the bargain. That same evening, as the builder drove out with his stallion, Svadilfari, to gather stones, a mare leaped from a forest and neighing ran up to the horse. When the stallion recognized what manner of horse this was, he became frantic and broke free from his harness. He galloped towards the mare, but she raced ahead of him into the forest. Behind them came the builder, trying to grab hold of his horse. Because the horses ran all that evening and night, the work was delayed. The next day, there was less work done than previously. When the builder saw that the work would not be finished, he flew into a giant's rage. Once the Aesir realized for certain that they were facing a mountain giant, they no longer respected their oaths. They called upon Thor, who came immediately, and the next thing to happen was that the hammer Mjolnir was in the air. In this way, Thor paid the builder his wages, but not the sun and the moon. Rather, Thor put an end to the giant's life in Jotunheim. He struck the first blow in such a way that the giant's skull broke into many pieces, and so Thor sent him down to Niflhel. But Loki's relations with Svadilfari were such that a while later he gave birth to a colt. It was gray and had 8 feet, and this is the best horse among gods and men. Sibyl prophecy has this to say: Then all the powerful gods went to their thrones of fate, the gods most sacred, and questioned themselves, who had infused all the air with treachery, and to the race of giants given odds made. Broken were oaths, the words and pledges, all the powerful agreements that had passed between them. Thor alone killed, bursting with fury. He seldom sits still when he hears such things. Okay, so that is quite a tale. So the gods, they basically hire a contractor here, and they want a house built, a fortress, and they want this fortress to be unassailable. And so this builder shows up out of nowhere, right? And he says, okay, I'll build you this fortress, but here's the deal. If I build it for you and I get it done within a certain amount of time before the winter, I get to marry Freya, who's like the goddess of love, right? And you also have to give me the sun and the moon. And this was considered a decent bargain. But as we read, like the giant, you know, he was disguising himself as this builder, and the gods, even though they didn't know he was a giant yet, they really had no intention of actually letting him, you know, follow through with this this work either. So it's almost like they were both trying to rip each other off. And Thor was away and, you know, smashing trolls somewhere else. But Loki, of course, made this deal happen, which we don't know why. Like maybe he was just doing it to mess with Freya. But when they found out, they said, listen, we're going to kill you like in a bad way if you don't find us a means of getting this guy to not fulfill his end of the bargain. He said, okay, I'll do it. And this is what he comes up with. He disguises himself as a mare. And then he runs out. And then when the stallion sees Loki as this mare, Loki keeps the stallion busy by letting it have sex with him. Right. So Loki, as a female horse, sees the easiest way out of this is to get the stallion worked up and have sex with it. And not only that, he gives birth to a horse later, and this horse is Sleipnir, and he has 8 legs. So yeah, that's where Sleipnir comes from. It's one of Loki's children. And he gives Sleipnir to Odin as a means of saying, hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up. But, you know, the stallion was busy with me, you know, right? And the builder, the giant, wasn't able to get the fortress built, but we got most of a fortress. And then Thor got to smash his head in with Mjolnir. So, you know, it's win-win. Right. So this was the telling of Sleipnir and how the giant builder got his head caved in by Thor. Okay, let's move on to Thor meets Utgarda-Loki. It's on page 57. It says, Thor reaches the stronghold of Utgarda-Loki. Thor and his companions continued on their journey, traveling until midday. Then they saw a fortress standing on a plain, and it was so big that in order to see over it, They had to bend their necks all the way back. They approached the fortress, but the fort entrance gate was shut. Thor went to the gate and tried to open it, but after struggling to open the stronghold, they finally had to squeeze between the bars. Entering in this way, they saw a large hall and approached it. The door was open, and inside they saw many people sitting on 2 benches. Most of them were rather large. They went before the king, Utgarda-Loki, and greeted him, but he took his time in noticing them. Then he said, grinning through his teeth, "News travels slowly from distant parts, but am I wrong in thinking that this little fellow is Thor the charioteer? Surely there is more of you than meets the eye. Tell me, companions, in what skills do you think you are capable of competing? No one can stay here with us who does not have some skill or knowledge greater than other men." Then he who stood at the back of the group, the one called Loki, spoke up. "I have a skill in which I am ready to be tested. No one here in the hall will prove quicker than I at eating his food." Utgarda-Loki answered, "That would be an accomplishment, if you are up to it, and feats such as that will be put to the test." Next he called out to the end of the bench to the one who was called Logi, or Fire, and took him to come forward on the floor and pit himself against Loki. Then a trough filled with meat was brought in and set on the hall floor. Loki placed himself at one end and Logi at the other. Each began to eat as fast as he could, and they met in the middle at the trough. Loki had eaten all the meat from the bones, but Logi had eaten not only the meat, but also the bones and even the trough. To everyone it seemed that Loki had lost the contest. Then Utgarda-Loki asked in what the youngster could compete. Thjalfi replied that he would run a race against whomever Utgarda-Loki chose. Utgarda-Loki called that a fine sport, but said that Thjalfi would have to be very quick if he intended to win. Utgarda-Loki made it clear that the matter would quickly be put to the test. Next, Utgarda-Loki stood up and went outside, where there was a good running course over a flat plain. He called a little fellow named Hugi to come to him and ordered him to run a race with Thjalfi. They ran the first race, and Hugi was so far in the lead that he turned around at the end and faced his opponent. Then Utgarda-Loki said, "Thjalfi, you will need to exert yourself more if you are to win this contest. Yet it is true that no one else has come here who seemed to me faster on his feet than you." Then they began to race for a second time. When Hugi came to the end of the course, he turned around, but Thjalfi was behind him by the distance of a longbow shot. Utgarda-Loki then said, "I think Thjalfi knows how to run a good race, but I have no faith that he will win. Now comes the test. Let him run the third race." When Hugi reached the end of the race and turned around, Thjalfi had not even reached the midpoint of the course. Everyone then said that the contest was over. Utgarda-Loki asked Thor what feat he wanted to show them, as so many tales were told about his exploits. Thor answered that he would most like to pit himself against someone in drinking. Utgarda-Loki said that this contest could easily be arranged. He went into the hall and called to his cupbearer, telling him to bring the feasting horn from which his retainers usually drank. The cupbearer quickly brought the horn and placed it in Thor's hand. Then Utgarda-Loki said, "It is thought that drinking from this horn is well done if it is emptied in one drink. Some drain it in 2, but no one is such a small-time drinker that he cannot finish it in 3. Thor eyed the horn, and it did not seem very large, although it was rather long. He was quite thirsty and began to drink, swallowing hugely and thinking that it would not be necessary to bend himself over the horn more than once. When he had drunk as much as he could, he bent back from the horn and looked in to see how much drink remained. It seemed to him that the level in the horn was only slightly lower than it had been before. Utgarda-Loki then said, "Good drinking, although not at all that much. I would not have believed it had not been told that Thor the Aesir would not have drunk more, but I know that you will drain it in the second drink." Thor gave no reply, but put the horn to his mouth and resolved to take a larger drink. He struggled with it as long as he could hold his breath, and noticed that he could not lift up the bottom end of the horn as much as he would have liked. Whenever he lowered the horn from his mouth and looked in, it seemed to him the level had gone down even less than it had in the first try. Although there was now enough space at the top of the horn above the liquid to carry the drink without spilling it, Utgarda-Loki asked, "What now, Thor? Are you going to be so brave that you will take one sip more than is good for you? It seems to me that if you want to take a third drink from the horn, then it will have to be the biggest. But among us here, you will not be known as a great man as the Aesir call you, unless you give a better account of yourself in other contests than it seems to me you are doing in this one." Then Thor grew angry. Placing the horn to his mouth, he drank with all his might, continuing as long as he could. When he looked into the horn, he could see at least some difference. Then he gave the horn back and could drink no more. Utgarda-Loki said, "Clearly your strength is not as great as we thought. But will you still try your hand in other contests? It is obvious that you are not going to succeed here." Thor replied, "I will make a try at still another game. But when I was home among the Aesir, I would have found it strange if such drinks were called little. What sort of contest will you offer me now?" Utgarda-Loki replied, "Here among us, little boys do something that is thought a rather small matter. They lift my cat off the ground. But I would not have thought it possible to propose such a thing to Thor of the Aesir, if I had not already seen that your strength is much less than I had thought." Now a gray cat, and rather a large one, jumped out onto the hall floor. Thor approached it, and placing his hand under the middle of the belly, started to lift up the cat. But as Thor raised his hand, the cat arched its back. When Thor had reached as high as he could, one of the cat's paws was lifted off the ground. Beyond this effort, Thor could do no more. Then Utgarda-Loki said, "This contest has gone as I expected it would. The cat is rather large, whereas Thor is short and small compared with the larger men among us here." Thor replied, "Although you call me little, let someone come forward and wrestle with me. Now I am angry." Utgarda-Loki looked over the benches and replied, "Here inside I do not see any man who you would find it dignified to wrestle. But wait, first let us see. Call my nurse, the old woman Ellie, to come here and let Thor wrestle with her, if he wants to. She was thrown to the ground men who seemed to me to be no less strong than Thor." Next, an old woman walked into the hall. Utgarda-Loki said she should wrestle with Thor of the Aesir. The story is not long to tell. The match went this way. The more Thor threw his strength into the grappling, the more steadfastly she stood her ground. Then the old crone showed her skill. Thor lost his footing and the contest grew fiercer. It was not long before Thor fell to one knee. Then Utgarda-Loki intervened. He told them to stop at the contest, saying that there was no need for Thor to challenge others to wrestle in the hall. By then it was late at night. Utgarda-Loki showed Thor and his companions to places on the benches, and there they were treated well for the rest of the night. Okay, so this is interesting, right? Thor and Loki and this other companion, Felfi, they go to this Utgarda-Loki's fortress, right? And he's this giant. And there's other giants there, and Thor obviously wants to throw his weight around. So they walk into the bar, they eye the place up, and they say, "All right, okay, yeah, it's us. We're the Aesir. What do you got for us?" And Utgarda-Loki looks at them and takes his time in actually introducing himself, and he calls Thor small and puny through this whole time. And poor Thor, he's the strongest of the gods. Like I said, he's like the Hercules. He wields the thunderbolt and Mjolnir, but he's just not that bright. Like you wanna root for the guy, but you realize that he's kind of a dope. He reminds me of this is gonna date me too, but if you remember like the movie Revenge of the Nerds, he's like Ogre, right? He's very dependable. He gets angry easily. He can smash stuff, but you're not gonna ask him to do your taxes or anything like that. And he is a good guy. Deep down, he seems like a jerk, and he's mean, and he throws his hammer around. But he's got a decent heart. Like he means well. It's just he's not too swift. And Utgarda-Loki knows this, and he goads him. He calls him puny and small and weak, and he dares him to drink from the ale horn. Then he says, "Sure." And Thor is drinking with all his might, and he can't finish it in one drink. So he tries again for the second drink. It gets even less. And then for the third drink, he's like, "I can't do it. I've never seen a horn like this. This is crazy." Say, "Okay, how about this? Call my cat over and try to lift it off the ground." And this gray cat, and Thor, literally, the mightiest of all the Aesir, tries to pick this cat up and barely gets one paw off the ground before he has to put it back down. So Utgarda-Loki says, "Well, you're not really as strong as I thought you would be, at all. How about this? One more contest." And Thor says, "Sure. Who should I wrestle among here? I'll take on your best wrestler." He says, "Well, maybe we'll just have you wrestle my nurse." Yeah, so he has him wrestle the nurse, old woman Ellie. And literally Thor, the Mjolnir swinger, the biggest, strongest of the gods, is wrestling with this old nurse. And she beats him. She makes him go down to one knee. So Utgarda-Loki says, "Okay, that's enough. We've seen enough, Thor. Thanks. That's good. Appreciate your effort. You guys are welcome to stay here for the night. No charge." And so they go to bed for the night. Let's see what happens in the morning. Okay, and this is under Utgarda-Loki reveals that Thor was deceived. In the morning, at first light, Thor and his companions stood up, dressed, and prepared to leave. Utgarda-Loki then came in and had a table set for them. There was no lack of hospitality as to food and drink. When they finished eating, they turned to leave. Utgarda-Loki stayed with them, accompanying them as they left the fortress. At their parting, Utgarda-Loki asked Thor how he thought the trip had gone and whether Thor had ever met a man more powerful. Thor replied that he could not deny that he had been seriously dishonored in their encounter. Moreover, I know that you will say that I am a person of little account, and that galls me. Utgarda-Loki replied, now that you are out of the fortress, I will tell you the truth. For if I live and I am the one to decide, you will never enter it again. On my word, I can assure you that you would never have been allowed to enter if I had known in advance that you had so much power in you, because you nearly brought disaster upon us. I have tricked you with magical shape changings, as I did the first time when you found the fortress. I am the one you met there, and when you tried to untie the food bag, you were unable to find where to undo it, because I had fastened it with iron wire. When you next struck me 3 times with the hammer, the first was the least, yet it was so powerful that it would have killed me had it found its mark. But when you saw a flat-topped mountain near my hall with 3 squared-shaped valleys in it, one deeper than the other, these were the marks of your hammer. I had moved this flat-topped mountain in front of your blows, but it did not seem to do anything. It was the same when your companions contested with my retainers, and so it was the first contest undertaken by Loki. He was very hungry and he ate quickly, but the one called Logi was wildfire himself, and he burned the trough no less quickly than the meat. When Thjalfi ran against the one called Hugi, that was my mind, and Thjalfi could not be expected to compete with its speed. When you drank from the horn, you thought it slow going, but on my word, that was a miracle I would never have believed could happen. The other end of the horn, which you could not see, was out in the ocean. When you come to the ocean, you will see how much your drinking lowered it. This is now called the tides. Utgarda-Loki had still more to say. I thought it no less a feat when you lifted the cat. Truly all those who saw you raise one of the cat's paws off the ground grew fearful, because the cat was not what it seemed to be. It was the Midgard serpent, which encircles all lands, and from head to its tail in length is just enough round the earth. But you pulled him up so high that he almost reached the sky. It too was a real wonder that you remained on your feet for so long during the wrestling. You fell no more than onto one knee, and you struggled with the crone Ellie, or old age. And no one accomplishes that after reaching the point where old age beckons, because no one overcomes old age. As we part, I can truthfully say that it would be better for us both if you never come again to meet me. Next time I will defend my stronghold with similar or other trickery, so that you will not get me into your power. When Thor heard this account, he gripped his hammer and raised it in the air. But when he was ready to strike, Utgarda-Loki was nowhere to be seen. Then Thor returned to the fortress, intending to destroy it. There he saw a broad, beautiful plain, but no stronghold. Then turning back, he journeyed until he came once again to Thrudvangar. In truth, it can be said that from then on he was determined to find a way to confront the Midgard serpent, and later on that happened. Now I believe that no one else could have given you a truer account of this journey by Thor. Okay. So it's interesting that Loki is the shapeshifter, god, and the trickster. And here we see the giant Utgarda-Loki is also a shapeshifter, a conjurer, a trickster. And he tricks Thor, but he tricks Loki as well, which is interesting, which means he's a better trickster than Loki. And this is a giant. Loki agrees to a contest where he can out-eat this guy named Logi, and Loki's fire. Fire just burns through everything, and as fast as Loki can eat the meat, he doesn't eat the bones, but the fire burns the trough, the meat, the bones, everything. And then this companion of theirs, Thjalfi, couldn't outrun Utgarda-Loki's mind. He was racing his mind. And your mind, obviously, if it were its own speed, it can think on its feet, and it can move far faster than your mind could probably take you. So Utgarda-Loki tricked the retainer into believing he was racing a person. But then the main tricks come against Thor. And he disguises the ale horn from Thor's sight, and he doesn't see that it's basically an empty, a bottomless horn that goes into the ocean. And Thor is literally trying to drink the ocean, although he thinks it's just a regular ale horn. And he says, "We couldn't believe you were actually draining the ocean as you drank it." And as you see, the level has shifted, and that's where the Norse explain the tides, right? So we can thank Thor for drinking the ocean enough to make tides. And then next was the cat. The cat, Utgarda-Loki disguised the Midgard serpent in the form of this cat. And Thor literally tried to lift this cat, which was the Midgard serpent. And as he said, Jormungandr actually is a snake, a giant sea serpent that can circle the earth. And so Thor, by even getting one paw off the ground, they were afraid he was going to lift this sea serpent into the sky. And as we'll read about in Ragnarok, they do meet again, Jormungandr and Thor. And then lastly, the Norse, right? Eli, or old age. And in the Norse language, I believe Eli means old age. So literally, Utgarda-Loki would say, okay, now you're going to fight my nurse, old age. But Thor, God love him, he tries so hard, he wasn't bright enough to pick up on this. So he wrestles this nurse. The nurse is old age. You're not going to beat old age, right? It just exists. And they were amazed that he was able to hold off old age that long and only go down to one knee. So they were impressed. But of course, Thor, hearing that he was tricked, he got all pissed off, raised his hammer to strike down Utgarda-Loki. Guy was gone. Then he went back to see where the fortress was and destroy that. It was just an apparition. So this was the tale of Thor meeting Utgarda-Loki. And this series of trickery and taking advantage of the good nature and the dim wit of Thor, yeah, it's pretty prevalent in the myths, in the Edda. This one is actually probably the best example, but Thor definitely gets taken advantage of by more than a few people. All right, now let's move to the Death of Baldr. This is on page 65. The Death of Baldr and Hermod's Ride to Hell. Then Gangleri asked, is there still more to be told about the Aesir? Thor accomplished a great feat on that journey. Hai replied, one could tell of an event that the Aesir themselves thought more important. The origin of the saga was that Baldr the Good had a series of ominous dreams. He saw his life threatened. When he told the Aesir about his dreams, they took counsel and decided to seek a truce for Baldr, protecting him from all dangers. Frigg took oaths that Baldr would not be harmed by fire and water, iron, all kinds of metal, stones, the earth, trees, diseases, animals, birds, poisons, and snakes. When this was done, it became known Baldr and the Aesir took to amusing themselves by having Baldr stand in front of all the others at the assembly while some would shoot at him, some would strike blows, and some would hit him with stones. Whatever was done caused him no injury, and all thought this was remarkable. But when Loki, son of Laufey, saw this, it angered him that Baldr was uninjured. After changing himself in the likeness of a woman, he went to Frigg at Fensalir. Frigg asked this woman if she knew what the Aesir were doing at the assembly. The woman replied that everyone was shooting at Baldr, yet he suffered no injury. Then Frigg said, neither weapons nor wood will harm Baldr. I have received oaths from all of them. Then the woman asked, have all things given their oaths not to harm Baldr? Frigg answered, a shoot of wood grows to the west of Valhalla. It is called mistletoe, and it seemed too young for me to demand its oath. Immediately afterwards, the woman disappeared. Loki got hold of the mistletoe. He broke it off and went to the assembly. Hod, because he was blind, stood at the edge of the circle of people. Loki spoke to him, asking, why aren't you shooting at Baldr? Hod replied, because I can't see where Baldr is, and also I have no weapon. Then Loki said, you should be behaving like the others, honoring Baldr as I do. I will direct you where he is standing. Shoot this twig at him. Hod took the mistletoe and, following Loki's directions, shot at Baldr. The shot went right through Baldr, who fell to the ground dead. This misfortune was the worst that had been worked against the gods and men. Baldr's death left the gods speechless and so weak that they were unable to muster the strength to lift him up in their arms. They all looked at one another, and all were of a single mind against the one who had done the killing. But no one could take revenge because the place was deeply revered as a sanctuary. When the Aesir first tried to speak, all they could do was weep, and no one could form words to tell the others of his grief. Odin suffered most from his misfortune. This was because he understood most clearly how grievous was the loss, and that the death of Baldr was ruin for the Aesir. When the gods returned to their senses, Frigg asked who among the Aesir wished to gain all her love and favor by agreeing to ride the road to Hel to see if they could find Baldr. He was to offer Hel a ransom if she could let Baldr return home to Asgard. Hermod the Bald, Odin's son, was the one who agreed to undertake the journey. They caught Odin's horse Sleipnir and led it forward. Hermod mounted and galloped off. Then the Aesir took Baldr's body and carried it to the sea. Baldr's ship was called Ringhorn, and it was the greatest of all ships. The gods wanted to launch it and use it for Baldr's funeral pile, but the ship would not budge. Then they sent to Giantland for the giantess called Hyrrokin. She came riding a wolf, using a poisoned snake for reins. When she jumped off her mount, Odin called to 4 berserkers. He told them to watch that mount, but they were unable to hold it back, and they struck it down. Hyrrokin approached the prow of the ship. On her first try, she pushed so hard the log rollers underneath the keel of the ship caught fire, and the whole land shook. This angered Thor, who gripped his hammer. He would have crushed her head had not all the gods asked that she be left in peace. Baldr's body was carried out on the ship, and when his wife, Nananep's daughter, saw this, her heart burst from sorrow and she died. She too was carried onto the funeral pyre, which was set on fire. Next Thor stood up and blessed the pyre with Mjolnir. A dwarf named Lit ran in front of his feet. Thor kicked the dwarf with his foot. It landed in the fire and burned to death. Many kinds of beings came to this cremation. First to be mentioned is Odin. Frigg was with him, as with the Valkyries and the ravens. Frey rode in his chariot. It was drawn by the boar called Goldbristle, or Sheath-tooth. Heimdall rolled the horse Golden Forelock, and Freya drove her harnessed cats. Many from among the frost giants and mountain giants also came. Odin laid the gold ring Draupnir, the dripper, on the pyre. It had the characteristic afterwards that every 9th night 8 gold rings of equal weight dripped from it. Baldr's horse, with all its riding gear, was led onto the pyre. But about Hermod the following is told. For 9 nights he rode through the valleys so deep and dark that he saw nothing before he reached the river Gjöll, and rode on to the Gjöll bridge. The bridge was roofed with shining gold, and the maiden guarding it was named Modgud. She asked Hermod about his name, and the family said that the previous day 5 troops of dead men had ridden across the bridge. Yet the bridge echoed more under you alone, and you lack the color of the dead. Why do you ride here on the road to hell? He answered, saying, I ride to hell in search of Baldr, but have you seen anything of Baldr on the hell road? She replied that Baldr had ridden across the Gjöll bridge, and down to the north lies the road to hell. Hermod rode until he came to the gates of hell. He dismounted from his horse and tightened the girth. Then he remounted and spurred a horse, which sprang forward, jumping with such force that it cleared the top of the gate without even coming near it. Then Hermod rode up to the hall. He dismounted and went inside. He saw that his brother Baldr was sitting in the seat of honor. He then stayed there through the night. In the morning, Hermod asked Hel to let Baldr ride home with him, telling her of the deep sorrow and wailing of the Aesir. But Hel answered that a test would be made to see whether Baldr was as well loved as some say. If all things in the world, alive or dead, weep for him, then he will be allowed to return to the Aesir. If anyone speaks against him or refuses to cry, then he will remain with Hel. Thereupon Hermod stood up. Baldr led him out of the hall, and taking the ring Draupnir, he sent it to Odin as a token. Along with other gifts, Nanna sent to Frigg a linen robe. To Fulla she sent a gold-fingered ring. Hermod then retraced his path, riding into Asgard, where he recounted all that had happened, what he had seen and heard. Next, the Aesir sent messengers throughout the world, asking that Baldr be wept out of hell. All did so, people and animals, the earth, stones, trees, all the metals, in the way that you have seen these things weep when they come out of freezing cold into warmth. As the messengers have accomplished their task, were returning home, they found a giantess sitting in a cave. She said her name was Thok, or gratitude. When they asked her to weep Baldr out of hell, she said, Thok will weep dry tears at Baldr's funeral pyre. Alive or dead, the old man's son gave me no joy. Let hell hold what she has. People believe that the giantess was Loki, the son of Laufey, the one who did most harm to the Aesir. Whew, that was a long one. All right. Loki's a real a-hole. So here's what happens. We got Baldr here, and Frigg loves him. She's his mother. And they said, okay, well, I think Baldr deserves to be kept from this harm that he dreams about. And we said that he has this ability to foresee events, but these events never come to an effective decision, right? He foresees these things happening. He has these omens, these I guess you would call visions, and for whatever reason, it never turns out in his favor. And this is one of those times. He had these bad dreams. Frigg said, okay, I'll make everything in the world swear an oath to me that they will not harm you, that no harm will come. So she's kind of making him impervious. And if you think about the Greek myths, Achilles' mother is the same way. She's a goddess. She doesn't want to see her son die, so what does she do? She takes him to the river Styx, and she holds him by the ankle, by the heel, and she dips him in the river Styx, thereby making him more or less immune, except for that one little place by where she held him, by the Achilles' heel. So Frigg does the same thing, but she leaves him open to one vulnerability. She says to this old woman, who we know is Loki, and Loki decides, I'm going to find out if he really is invincible, because I don't really care that Baldr is getting all this attention and he's the golden boy and no one's paying attention to me. So he finds out that Frigg did not secure an oath from this plant called mistletoe because she thought it was too young to have to give an oath. So he cut the mistletoe off the branch and brought it to the blind god named Hod. And Hod couldn't see, and he was at the back of the line, so he had no idea like what was being asked of him. But Loki said, "Here, try to kill Baldr." And it's also funny that all the other gods are amusing themselves by breaking logs over Baldr's head or trying to stab him with a sword or set him on fire, and he's just like standing there taking it, like, "Okay, guys, that's funny, thanks." Because this is getting old. But Hod comes up and throws the mistletoe at him like a dart, and it literally pierces right through him, and he drops stone cold dead right there. And the Aesir are just like, "Whoa, is he dead? That's impossible. I literally just shot him like with 5 arrows, and they all bounced off. This little mistletoe killed him." They wanted to know how it happened, and they suspected Loki, but they wanted to make a deal with Hel, which also happens to be one of Loki's offspring. And they send Hermod to Hel to make a bargain with Hel that if they get Baldr returned to the Aesir, they will give her something in exchange. She says, "I'll let him out if you can get everything in the world to weep for him, because if he was so great, if he really was the golden child, everything should cry and lament his passing." And they were even able to get all of the inanimate objects of the world to weep. And this is how the Norse explained condensation, right? When you had something frozen or condensation on glass or metal, and the water dripped off, they thought it was as if the object was weeping. But there was one giantess, her name was Thok, and they think that Thok was actually Loki in disguise as well. And she refused to weep for him. So in Hel, Baldr would remain. And let's go to the next passage and find out how the Aesir figure out that it was Loki's doing. So we go to page 69. This is Loki is caught and the Aesir take revenge. Then Gangleri said, "Loki was the cause of many things. First he caused Baldr's death and then managed to have Baldr retained in Hel. But was no vengeance taken for this?" Hai replied, "He was repaid in a way that he will long feel. With the gods as angry at him as might be expected, he ran away and hid at a mountain. There he built a house with 4 doors, so that he could look out from the house in all directions. During the day he often changed into a salmon and hid in a place called Ferrang's Falls. He set his mind to discovering what sort of ploy the Aesir might devise to catch him in the waterfall. Sitting in the house, he took some linen yarn and looped it into a mesh in the way that nets have been made ever since. A fire was burning in front of him. Suddenly he saw that the Aesir were only a short distance away, Odin having discovered Loki's whereabouts from Hlidskjalf. Loki jumped up and threw the net under the fire, and he dashed out onto the river. When the Aesir reached the house, the first to enter was Kvasir, the wisest of all. He looked into the fire, and when he saw the outline of the net in the ashes, he realized that it was a device for catching fish. He told the Aesir, and they set to work. They made a net for themselves, copying from Loki what they'd saw in the ashes. With the net all near ready, the Aesir went to the river and cast it in the waterfall. Thor held one end and the Aesir held the other, and together they dragged the net. But Loki moved ahead of them, diving deep, and he placed himself between 2 boulders. As the Aesir pulled the net over him, they realized that something alive was there. They went back up to the waterfall and again cast the net. This time they weighed it down so heavily that nothing could slip under it. Again Loki stayed ahead of the net, but when he saw it was only a short distance to the sea, he jumped up over top of the net and swam back up the falls. The Aesir, now seeing where he was going, returned to the falls. They divided themselves between the 2 banks, while Thor waited in the middle of the river, and they worked their way down towards the sea. Loki realized that he had 2 options. He could leap out to the sea, which meant putting his life in danger, or he could once again jump over the net. He chose the latter, jumping as fast as he could over the net. Thor reached out and succeeded in grabbing him, but still the salmon slipped through his hands. Thor finally got a firm hold of its rear tail, and for this reason salmon are narrow towards the rear. Loki was now captured, and with no thought of mercy he was taken to a cave. The Aesir took 3 flat stones, and setting them on their edges, broke a hole through each of them. Then they caught Loki's sons, Vali and Nari or Narfi. Aesir changed Vali into a wolf, and he ripped apart his brother Narfi. Next the Aesir took his guts, and with them they bound Loki onto the top of the 3 stones, one under his shoulders, second under his loins, and a third under his knees. The fetters became iron. Then Skadi took a poisonous snake and fastened it above Loki so that its poison drips to his face. But Sigyn, his wife, placed herself beside him from where she holds a bowl to catch the drops of venom. When the bowl becomes full, she leaves to pour out the poison, and at that moment the poison drips on Loki's face. He convulses so violently that the whole earth shakes. It is what is known as an earthquake. He will lie bound there until Ragnarok. All right. So that's how they got him. So Loki, after he had killed Baldr, he could have got him out, right? He could have returned, Baldr to the Aesir if he just would have cried for Baldr and wept as the world did. But that was not Loki's way. He saw to it that Baldr was killed. He was not going to let Hel bring him back. So the Aesir tracked him down, and he hid out. He hid out and he disguised himself as a salmon. And they tried to catch him in this net. And then eventually Thor got a hold of him, and they say that's why salmon are narrow by the tails, because when Thor gripped him, he literally stretched him out. But they took Loki and they turned his sons into animals, and the one son ripped apart the other son, and they placed him on these stones and tied him together. And Skadi put a snake over his head that literally drips venom onto him like water torture. But his wife Sigyn, being faithful, she holds a bowl above his head to catch the drops. But when the bowl fills up, she has to pour it out and start over. And when she does, a drop or two of the poison from the snake gets on Loki, and he writhes in pain. And this is where the Norse believe the earthquakes come from. It is Loki trapped underground in these fetters, and when the god shakes from the pain, this is the earth shaking as well, and so it will be until Ragnarok. Speaking of which, let's move to the Ragnarok myth. Page 71. The High One reveals the events of Ragnarok. Then Gangleri asked, "What is to be said about Ragnarok? I have not heard it spoken of before." High replied, "There are many important things to be said about it. First will come the winter called Fimbulfeder, extreme winter. Snow will drive in from all directions. The cold will be severe and the winds will be fierce. The sun will be of no use. 3 of these winters will come, one after the other, with no summer in between. Before that, there will have been another 3 winters with great battles taking place throughout the world. Brothers will kill brothers for the sake of greed, and neither father nor son will be spared in the killings and the collapse of kinship. So it is said in Sibyl prophecy, brothers will fight, bringing death to each other. Sons of sisters will split their kin bonds. Hard times for men, rampant depravity, ages of axe, ages of swords, shields split, wind age, wolf age, until the world falls into ruin. Next will come an event thought to be of much importance. The wolf will swallow the sun, and mankind will think it has suffered a terrible disaster. Then the other wolf will catch the moon, and he too will cause much ruin. The stars will disappear from the heavens. So also there is this to be told. The whole earth, together with the mountains, will start to shake so that trees will loosen from the ground. The mountains will fall, and all fetters and bonds will sever and break. Then the Fenrir's wolf will break free. The sea will surge onto land as the Midgard serpent rises in giant fury and advances up on land. Then it also will happen that the ship, Naglfar, loose from its moorings. It is made of the nails of dead men. And for this reason, it is worth considering that warning that if a person dies with untrimmed nails, he contributes crucial material to Naglfar, a ship that both gods and men would prefer not to be sea-built. On the flooding sea, Naglfar comes floating. The giant steering Naglfar is named Hrym. Meanwhile, the Fenrir's wolf advances with its mouth gaping. Its upper jaws reaches to the heavens, and the lower one drops down to the earth. He would open it still wider if only there was room. Flames shoot out of his eyes and nostrils. The Midgard serpent spews out so much venom that it spatters throughout the air and into the sea. He is terrible and will be on one side of the wolf. Amid this din, the sky splits apart, and in ride the sons of Muspel. Surt comes first, riding with fires burning both before and behind him. His sword is magnificent, and the glare from it is brighter than that of the sun. As they ride through the Bifrost, it will break, as was told earlier. Muspel's sons advance until they reach the plain called Vidgrid, or battle plain. The Fenrir's wolf and the Midgard serpent also go there. Then Loki arrives, and also Hrym. The latter is accompanied by all the frost giants, while all of Hel's own follow Loki. The sons of Muspel have their own battle troop, and it shines brilliantly. The field Vigrid lies 100 leagues in each direction. As these events occur, Heimdall stands up and blows the Gjalhorn with all his strength. He wakes all the gods, who then hold an assembly. Odin now rides to Mimir's well, seeking Mimir's counsel for both himself and his followers. The ash Yggdrasil shakes, and nothing, whether in heaven or on earth, is without fear. The Aesir and all the Einherjar dress for war and advance on the field. Odin rides in front of them. He wears a golden helmet and a magnificent coat of mail, and he carries his spear called Gungnir. He goes against the Fenrir's wolf, with Thor advancing at his side. Thor will be unable to assist Odin because he will have his hands full fighting the Midgard serpent. Frey will fight against Surt, and it will be a fierce exchange before Frey falls. His death will come about because he lacks the good sword, the one that he gave to Skirnir. By now the hound Garm, who was bound in the front of Gniphelir, will also have broken free. He, the worst of monsters, will fight against Tyr. They will beat each other's death. Thor will kill the Midgard serpent, and then he will step back 9 feet. Because of the poison the serpent spits on him, he will fall to earth dead. The wolf will swallow Odin, and that will be his death. But immediately afterwards, Vidar will stride forward and thrust one of his feet into the lower jaw of the wolf. He wears on that foot the shoe that has been assembled through the ages by collecting the extra pieces that people cut away from the toes and heels when fashioning their shoes. Thus those who want to help the Aesir should throw these extra pieces away. With one hand he takes hold of the wolf's upper jaw and rips apart its mouth, and this will be the wolf's death. Loki will battle with Heimdall, and they will be the death of each other. Next Surt will throw fire over the earth and burn the whole world. So says Sibyl prophecy. Heimdall blows loudly, his horn in the air. Odin speaks to Mimir's head. The ash of Yggdrasil trembles as it stands. The old tree groans and the giants break free. What of the Aesir? What of the elves? All giant land groans. The Aesir meet in assembly. The dwarves moan before their doors of stone. They who know the cliffs, do you know now or what? Hrym drives from the east, holding his shield before him. Jormungand thrashes in giant wrath. The serpent lashes the waves. The eagles screech. Needful rips apart corpses. Naglfar breaks loose. A ship sails from the east. Muspel's followers are coming across the sea, and Loki is steering. There with the wolf are all the giant sons. With them on the voyage is Byleist's brother. Surt comes from the south with the fiery destruction of branches. The sun shines from the sword of the gods of the slain. Stone cliffs tumble and troll witches stumble. Men tread the road to hell as the sky splits apart. Then comes to Hlin Frigg, her second sorrow when Odin goes to fight with the wolf, and Beli's bright bane, Frey, advances against Surt. There Frigg's beloved Odin will fall. Odin's son goes to fight with the wolf, Vidar, on the way to the Carian's beast. He lets his sword hew to the heart of Fredrung's son, the wolf Fenrir. Thus the father is avenged. Steps back the renowned son of earth, Thor, doomed from the serpent, fearing no shame. All men will abandon their world when Midgard's protector strikes in rage. The sun grows black, the earth sinks into the sea, the bright stars vanish from the heavens. Steam surges up and fires rage. Heat reaches high against heaven itself. Here it is also said, Vigrid is the plain's name where Surt and the deer gods meet in battle. 100 leagues extends in each direction. That field is destined for them. All right. So that's Ragnarok. I need a drink after reading that. So all this stuff happens, right? The two wolves capture the sun and the moon. Skoll and Hati devour the sun and the moon and cast the world into darkness. Then there's this great splitting in the sky, right? And then this ship, which I guess is made up of people's fingernails, which is bizarre. I mean, that thing must look gross. But they say you should always trim your fingernails so that you don't add to the extra size of this ship. Naglfar, right. Naglfar, the ship of toenails. Whatever. It set sail, and that's bad. And then all of the big baddies come out, right? Fenrir breaks free of his binds, right? Remember that Tyr put his hand in Fenrir's mouth and it was bitten off, and that was the sacrifice that Tyr had to make in order for them to bind Fenrir. But now Fenrir is loose, this giant wolf that's destined to kill Odin. The Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, comes up on land. Surt comes from the south, and all of the legions of hell descend. It's chaos, right? It's Armageddon. And they meet on this great plain for this battle. All the gods assemble, and it's good versus evil. It's the end of the world as we know it, and nobody feels fine. So what happens here at the end? Well, each individual entity, good and evil, kill off each other. Thor smashes the Midgard serpent to death, but the poison kills Thor. Odin is swallowed by the wolf Fenrir, but his son kills the wolf. Surt kills Frey and splits the world in half and burns everything to fire. And now it's all over. So we'll read now After Ragnarok. And this is the rebirth. Page 76. Then Gangleri asks, what will be after heaven and earth and the whole world are burned? All the gods will be dead, together with Einherjar and the whole of mankind. Didn't you say earlier that each person will live in some world throughout all ages? The third replied, there will be at the time many good places to live, so also there will be many evil ones. It is best to be in Gimli in heaven. For those who take pleasure in good drink, plenty will be found in the hall called Brimir. It stands at the place of Okelnir, never cold. There is likewise a splendid hall standing on Nidalhof, dark mountains. It is made of red gold and is called Sindri, sparkling. In this hall, good and virtuous men will live. On Nostrandir, corpse strands, there is a large foul hall whose doors look to the north. It is constructed from the spines of snakes like a house with walls woven from branches. The heads of all the snakes turn into the house, spitting venom so that a river poison runs through the hall. And down it must wade those who are oath-breakers and murderers, as it says here. I know a hall standing far from the sun, on Corpse Strand. The doors face north, poison drips in through the smoke hole. Walls of that hall are woven from snake spines. There oath-breakers and murderers wade through heavy streams. But the worst place is in Hrevgomir. There Nidhogg torments the corpses of the dead. Okay. Yeah. So you don't want to go to this corpse strand. This kind of it almost reminds me of Dante Alighieri's Inferno, right? It seems like a circle of hell where, in Dante's Inferno you have people that have to be buried head down in excrement, or are being boiled alive every day, or have vicious animals tear at their guts, and then they literally are built back up only to have those animals tear at their guts over and over again. It's just awful, evil, like demented, nightmarish torment forever. And here we have at Corpse Strand that the oathbreakers and the murderers have to move down this hall and wade through rivers of poison. And that doesn't sound very pleasant. And then Nidhogg torments the corpses. And Nidhogg is this other creature that lives beneath Yggdrasil in the lower worlds near hell, and is one of those demons of Norse mythology that you definitely didn't want to come across. Anyway, let's move on to 77. The High One describes the rebirth of the world. Then Gangleri asked, will any of the gods be living then, or will there be anything of earth or sky? High said, the earth will shoot up from the sea, and it will be green and beautiful. Self-sown acres of crops will then grow. Vidar and Vali survive, as neither the flood nor Surt's fire destroyed them. And they will inhabit Idavol, the place where Asgard was earlier. Through there will come Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, and they will have Mjolnir with them. Next Baldr and Hod will arrive from hell. They will all sit together and talk among themselves, remembering mysteries and speaking of what had been, of the Midgard serpent and the Fenrir's wolf. Then they will find in the grass the gold-playing pieces which the Aesir had owned. So it is said, Vidar and Vali will live in the sanctuaries of the gods. When Surt's fire goes dark, Modi and Magni will have Mjolnir at Vingrir's end of battle. In the place called Hodmir's Wood, two people will have hidden themselves from Surt's fire, called Leif, or Life, and Leifthrasir, Life Yearner. They have the morning dew for their food. From these there will come many descendants, that the whole world will be inhabited. So it says here, Leif and Leifthrasir will hide themselves in Hodmir's Holt. The morning dew they have for food. From them springs mankind. There is something else that you will find amazing. The son will have had a daughter no less beautiful than she, and this daughter will follow the path of her mother. As it says here, one daughter is born of Alfrodul, or the sun, before Fenrir destroys her. When the gods die, this maid shall ride her mother's paths. If you know how to ask questions reaching still further into the future, then I do not know the source of your questions, because I have never heard of anyone who could retell the events of the world further into the future. And may you find use in what you have learned. Okay, so what happens? Well, the whole world goes to pot. Everyone dies, or is burned in fire, or eaten by a wolf, or gets poisoned by a giant serpent. But Vidar and Vali, I believe they say, Odin's sons, are spared. Also, Modi and Magni, the two sons of Thor, are spared. So you have Aesir left. And then what do you know? Baldr finally makes his way out of hell because hell is emptied. So they just said, well, the place is empty. Maybe we should go back to Asgard and see what's going on there. And then they literally probably show up and the whole world is just smoking embers. And they're like, whoa, I guess we missed the last big party, which is Ragnarok. And they can probably say they were lucky to have missed it. Because now it's just them. Vidar, Vali, Mod and Magni, Hermod and Baldr. And then there are two people who are ironically called Leif, or Life, and Leifthrasir. So this is basically Adam and Eve, right? They live in this wooded area, and they survive off of the dew, which is interesting because I don't know how much calories are in the dew in this place. But life begins anew, and the son had a daughter. That's interesting. The son, S-U-N, had a daughter, and the son, her daughter is even brighter than she is. So with Ragnarok and the end, the book of Revelations, Armageddon, the apocalypse, there is death, destruction, and everything is torn down and laid to waste. But there are survivors, and the world is reborn, and it's a happy ending, right? It's not so different from the ending of most apocalyptic myths in other cultures, because if it's truly the end, and there is nothing left of the world, of the heavens, of the sky, of the oceans, then all of this that we're doing right now is simply leading up to the ultimate end, which is apocalypse, so why bother? The Norse believed, like many other cultures, that there would come a great cataclysmic battle, but after this battle, life would spring anew. The earth would literally bob out of the ocean, and it would already be self-farmed with crops growing and green plants sprouting, and everything would start over. So this was the Norse myth of Ragnarok and the rebirth. So that's it. Yeah, we've come to the end of the Prose Edda series, and we finished up with the Ragnarok and Rebirth myth. And it's cool to read. You can see many similarities between Christianity and Norse mythology, and with Greek mythology, the battle between the gods and the Titans, and how this battle, through all of the myths, like all of these, it is foretold in several of the myths preceding this one conclusion. It's almost like you get a teaser trailer after every one of these episodes about what Ragnarok will be and how it will have to happen. And this is just the way things are. So yeah, that was the Prose Edda. I said after concluding this, we'll move on to the saga of King Hrolf-Kraki. And that's actually a pretty interesting story. Yeah, we'll get into the saga of King Hrolf-Kraki for part 1 next time. Anyway, this will be it for this 3-part series. Again, I hope you enjoyed this whole thing. I hope you stuck around to hear the readings. Tried to keep it entertaining. And I picked 4 of my favorites from the prose. Anyway, if you like this or are liking the channel, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you intend to come back and see more. I intend to keep making this. And yeah, share it with family and friends if you think they would also be entertained by these myths that have been made now on the silver screen and in comic books and elsewhere. Anyway, we'll see you back here for part 1 of the saga of King Hrolf-Kraki. Until then, and as always, take it easy.